What happened to Frieren? Frieren became the highest rated anime in one season, but it's run into some issues since its debut. On top of a number of people claiming it's overhyped, and the anime experiencing a viral controversy, the manga has been on hiatus for over half a year. While the material in season 1 is amazing, the story afterward is somewhat hit or miss. So whether you're already a fan of Frieren or still thinking of checking it out, you're probably wondering whether Frieren is really that good. Is it just another overhyped series, or does it deserve to be the #1 rated story in anime? That's why in this video, I'd like to look back on the rise of Frieren's anime, discuss how it compares to the manga, and explain why Frieren is an amazing story that, while not exactly perfect, offers a fun way to fall in love with fantasy all over again. Just be warned that there will be some spoilers. So first, let's talk about how Frieren got so popular, because it's been out for a while now. At this point, it's easy to assume Frieren only got popular because of the anime, but that's just not true. Frieren has pretty much always been popular, at least among manga fans. Frieren debuted in 2020 in Weekly Shonen Sunday. In just 1 year, it won the Taisho Award, an award meant to highlight underrated manga. In 2022, it reached 5.6 million copies in circulation after Volume 7, which is more than My Hero Academia. Needless to say, Frieren had become one of Shogakukan's best new manga, and for good reason. Manga fans at the time praised the series for its unique take on the fantasy formula, featuring a story that focused on life after the quest to save the world that is so common in fantasy stories. Instead of focusing on the main goal, Frieren highlighted the many steps along the journey, reminding its characters and fans that it's the journey itself that's truly rewarding. Evidently, Frieren was popular before the anime, but obviously it was even more popular once the anime came out. First of all, people lost their minds when Madhouse announced they were the ones making the anime. This is the same studio that's made anime like Death Note, Hunter x Hunter, One Punch Man, the first season, not the second season, Black Lagoon, No Game No Life, and Overlord. So there was really no question that Madhouse was going to make Frieren look amazing. But what happened next was completely unexpected. Madhouse did something a bit uncommon at the time and started Frieren with a 4-episode debut. So on week 1, fans could stream the first 4 episodes from the start. This led to tons of new fans watching all 2 hours of Frieren the first week it was out. At the time, everyone was praising the emotional characters and especially the gorgeous visuals. Even if you weren't a big fantasy fan, everyone was checking out Frieren because the word on the street was that it was one of the best looking anime in years. From here, Madhouse continued to release episodes on a weekly schedule all the way through March of the next year. This means that in a world of Season 2, Part 2, final Part 2s, Madhouse released a 28-episode full season on a consistent weekly schedule. So on top of gaining a ton of new fans in week 1, they continued to be the #1 anime for the next 6 months. And this is exactly the kind of hype train that led Frieren to become the #1 rated anime on the internet. To this day, it's the highest rated anime on Mal, Analyst, and LiveChart, and it's one of the top rated manga on MangaDex. So while it's easy to take it for granted, it's no small feat that Frieren became the biggest anime in just 1 season. Unfortunately, this wasn't welcomed by everyone in the community. But before I explain why that is, make sure to check out my next live stream. I stream 3 times a week every week, and I even review new Jump chapters every Sunday. So as much as everyone loved Frieren, it wasn't without its vitriol. Even when they dropped the first 4 episodes, while everyone else was hyping up the anime, there were plenty of people who didn't get the hype or thought the visuals were just okay. This was really the only criticism against the show, besides people outright saying it wasn't as good as people made it out to be. I can't speak for everyone, but I think Frieren is one of the best looking anime in a long time. It doesn't exactly have Studio Ghibli level levels of animation, but the colors are vibrant, the scenery looks gorgeous, and the characters are full of expression. And while this animation might not be a perfect 10 out of 10, it's certainly one of the most consistent looking shows out there. I tried my best to find some genuine criticism of the show ever since the last episode, but most of it amounts to, well, it's good, but it's not that good. Basically, people don't like that it's so popular, but most of them can't really argue against why it's so popular. To be fair, it is subjective, so if you don't like the show, then nobody can tell you you're wrong. And the story isn't perfect either, which I'm going to get into in just a few minutes. But when you see people say Frieren is overhyped, most of the time they're just being salty. The manga was already popular before, and the anime was made by one of the best studios in the industry. So while it might be slightly overrated, the anime deserves to be this popular. Unfortunately, this popularity came with the usual brand of anime fan nonsense, specifically surrounding the demons. There's an episode in the anime where Frieren is fighting this demon Aura. Aura's power is that she controls you if she has more mana, but Frieren overpowers her and makes her take her own life.
Kill yourself.
While this is happening, the show goes out of its way to make it very clear that these demons are completely unredeemable, even when they claim to want peace, which is shown to be total BS. Frieren makes it clear that demons are categorically untrustworthy, which in a logical world makes perfect sense because literally, what is a demon? But this is the internet, so in a totally rational fashion, hundreds of people jumped online to claim that Frieren was a problematic character and that the story was clearly fascist. The episode sparked some controversy at the time and still generates debate surrounding the idea of making categorically evil monsters in stories. But at this point, everyone is kind of over it. Obviously, it never stopped the show from gaining new fans. If anything, Madhouse should wear this incident as a badge of honor. The same thing happened at Demon Slayer when people wrote entire articles about Tanjiro's earrings, and it's happened at least a couple of times to My Hero Academia. Whenever a new anime gets really popular really fast, some idiot on the internet gets their 5 seconds of fame by saying this show is now problematic. All it did was prove that Frieren was the next big thing. The only real takeaway is that some fans genuinely took issue with portraying a group of characters as completely irredeemable, especially in today's market where anti-villains and moral ambiguity are popular. In any event, these were really the only two issues Frieren ran into. People tried to say it wasn't as good as everyone was making it out to be. Then they claimed the show was problematic, even though it was using the same trope as literally every other classic fantasy. 6 months later, Frieren is still the highest rated anime, and it's pretty obvious that this is a must-watch for any anime fan. It's already one of Madhouse's best anime with amazing visuals and engaging characters. On top of that, this anime is a near-perfect adaptation of the manga. For the most part, Season 1 is a cut-for-cut copy of the manga, with practically nothing left out. Combine that with the visuals, soundtrack, and voice acting, and Frieren is as close to a perfect anime adaptation as you can get. So if you're wondering whether Season 1 is worth watching, you're doing yourself a disservice the more time you spend not watching Frieren. But for those of you who prefer manga, or for anyone who's finished the anime and wants to read the rest of the story, there's an even bigger question. Should you read the manga? Obviously, the manga was already popular and everyone loved the anime, but is the manga just as good as the anime, and is it worth reading the new chapters? Well, let me start by addressing brand new fans, because there's a couple of problems later in the manga that are worth keeping in mind. So, for anyone thinking of reading the manga from the very beginning, there's a number of reasons why Frieren will stand out as one of the better manga in the last few years. The first thing that stands out are the characters. In just the first chapter, author Kanehito Yamada gets you invested in Frieren and her party of adventurers. Very rarely do I find myself emotionally investing in characters early on, but just in the first chapter, Yamada made me care about these characters in a real way. Frieren is often seems stoic, but the first chapter shows readers the one time where she breaks down and cries. We see the very real bond these characters share, and it makes us care about them, which makes the loss of these characters hit even heavier. This also carries to the next characters we meet like Frieren and Stark. It's no surprise that Frieren is just as mainstream as a series like Demon Slayer, because they both do an excellent job of delivering timeless characters. Frieren is the resting bitch face of the group that practically serves as the party's mom friend. Stark is the boy among girls that is constantly doing the manual labor and often struggles to live up to the expectations of his female peers. Even the side characters are timeless. For example, there's Ubel, the classic edgy girl that will probably get her own bath water in season 2. There's also Denkin, the cunning but rational old man among young mages. On top of having incredible characters, Frieren somehow perfectly balances the pacing with its slower approach to storytelling. Some people feel like nothing happens for most of the show, which is a reasonable complaint when a lot of the story features side quests. But that's also one of the story's main appeals. Frieren is a story about life after the main quest, so it largely focuses on a narrative that weaves through all of these side quests, and it achieves this by making each side quest special. One quest explains the history of the power system. One quest tells the story of an old man who guards his home for hundreds of years. One combines the stories of a father making up for the loss of his son and the budding romance between Stark and Frieren. Frieren is both literally and figuratively magical, and a lot of that magic comes from the way it makes all of these seemingly pointless adventures worthwhile. So much so that even when I was rereading the manga, this story made me want to pick up a really good RPG like Final Fantasy and just get lost in a fantasy world doing random quests. There have been many fantasy anime that have done something similar. Dragon Quest, Solo Leveling, Shangri-La Frontier, but in those cases, I really just wanted to make a cool character and kill bosses. With Frieren, it was different. Now I want to completely avoid the bosses and do every great side quest I can find. That is the magic of reading Frieren. Granted, I would argue the anime is the better experience. I think Tsukasa Abe is a very good artist, but I wouldn't say their art style is so good that it makes the manga any better than the anime. So the anime is probably the better choice, but for those of you who love manga, you should definitely check out the source material. That being said, this becomes somewhat of a different story once you get past the exam arc, which brings us into my two criticisms against Frieren. And as far as I can tell, these are unpopular positions among manga fans, but they're worth mentioning for any new fans, and they're especially important if you like the anime and want to continue the manga. So my first complaint is that nothing really happens. And I call this a complaint because I have mixed feelings on this one. On the one hand, Frieren's side quests have engaged me in a way that no manga ever has. On the other hand, these side quests can sometimes drag out the later half of the story. Whereas they're much more charming in the early chapters, once the main party reaches the northern region and they're making progress towards the Demon King's palace, these side quests kind of get in the way. And again, I'm kind of torn on this one because this is what makes Frieren so special. I will admit that the side quests do get scaled back somewhat after the exam. At this point, we get what you might call big arcs like the Golden Land arc or the current Foundation Festival arc. It kind of depends on who you ask, but if you don't like this part of season 1, then you probably won't like it in the new chapters either. It's a small complaint in a story that is mostly character driven, which brings me to what is probably my one real criticism against the story, namely that it relies a lot on flashbacks. So Frieren gets you invested early on because of the OG party, the party of heroes. And early on, whenever Frieren learns a lesson or remembers something, she often recalls one of her adventures with Himmel and her friends. It makes sense because they're some of the most important characters in this universe. And it works because they're all great characters, so it's always nice to see more of them. The only problem is that it seems like we get a flashback every time Frieren learns something. See, Frieren is special because she's not the new kid learning everything for the first time. She's one of the strongest mages in the story, and she's already been on a 10-year quest to beat the Demon King. True, we do learn in the first chapter that she has plenty of room to grow, but when you have this elf granny that kind of knows everything, it makes moments of character growth that much more important. And while flashbacks can be a useful tool, typically you want to focus on whatever exchange is going on in the moment to flesh out the characters and show them as they experience whatever is going on. But what usually happens is something like this. So Frieren will hit an obstacle. Then, say, Fern says something that reminds Frieren of Himmel the hero. Then we get a scene where Himmel taught her a lesson like 50 years ago. Then we cut back to the present where Frieren seemingly learns a lesson. But here's the problem. This isn't really learning a lesson so much as it is remembering something you already learned. Which kind of works sometimes. The whole point of this story is that Frieren kind of ignored her friends. So her only just appreciating what they were telling her decades later is perfectly in character and makes a lot of sense. But after a while, it starts to feel like a cheap shortcut. Like where we should see Frieren reflecting on what's going on in the moment, and especially counting on her new friends to help her grow, it often feels like we just work around that by relying on stuff that's already happened. It's not a huge flaw, but it is something that stands out the more you read the manga. And it really only occurred to me when I got to the Goddess's Monument arc. I won't spoil too much for you, but basically there's an arc later in the story where Frieren accidentally sends herself back in time and has to go on a new quest with her old party. It's a decent arc, but the problem I had with it was that it felt redundant. You already spend a lot of time fleshing these characters out by this point, and this arc doesn't really change anything about them since it's trying to avoid inconsistencies. I definitely wouldn't call it pointless, but I have to say it's my least favorite arc in the story. The biggest takeaway is that it makes you very aware of just how much the story likes to use flashbacks. It certainly doesn't ruin the story. Like I said, this party is why you get into Frieren right away, but it can be somewhat distracting in the later chapters when you've already become familiar with these older characters and would rather focus on the current story. Besides that, I think Frieren is an otherwise perfect manga. Like I said, those are my only real complaints, and they're really just that, complaints. They definitely don't ruin the story, and I'm probably in the minority. That being said, there is still one more concern going forward, and that is whether Frieren is setting itself up for failure. This goes for both the anime and the manga. First of all, with such a perfect and unprecedented first season, it's only natural to wonder if season 2 will be just as good. People have insane expectations for Frieren now, and especially considering the manga is somewhat hit or miss after season 1, I think those expectations will lead to a lot of people being disappointed and claiming that Frieren fell off. On the manga end, the story has hit a wall, so to speak. Any manga fan should be used to breaks, and Frieren has gone on a few breaks by now. But right now, Frieren is in the middle of its longest hiatus ever. In fact, it hasn't had a new chapter in 6 months, and even when it is running, it only gets like 2 chapters every month, which creates 2 concerns. One, is the story gonna fall behind as it rushes to wrap things up? And 2, will this narrow gap in chapters create issues for the anime? For these reasons, it makes sense why people might be worried about Frieren. That being said, I think Frieren is going to be more than okay. It did what feels impossible and dropped 28 episodes in a row and kept people engaged for half a year. And despite its flaws, the manga continues to be one of the top selling series. So is there reason to be concerned? Yes. But does that mean you should be worried about the future of Frieren? Not even close. Madhouse has proved time and time again that they know how to make amazing anime. And while the later chapters can be hit or miss, the major story arcs after season 1 are some of the best in the series. I do think the hype will die down a bit somewhere down the line, but that's only natural. Nobody can be king forever. And that's no reason to not check out the story. Frieren has maybe one flaw, and is otherwise a perfect story. Better yet, it's a perfect story for new fantasy fans, as well as a great reminder to old fans of why they love this genre. It makes Frieren a magical series, and it's exactly why it deserves to be one of the most popular anime of all time. But maybe I'm wrong. How would you rate Frieren? How does it compare to other fantasy stories? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And make sure to become a channel member. You'll get badges and emojis for live streams, you can pick which series I cover next, and you can even get credited in future videos. Also check out my other Frieren videos, which you can find in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.